Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we're going to take a quick look at some tips and tricks to help build a D&D world, build a D&D adventure, anything that you might have to personally create for your own campaign. Now, there are plenty of source books out there, things like Curse of Strahd, things like the Forgotten Realms. If you don't want to make your own maps, if you don't want to make your own adventures, you certainly do not have to. There's plenty of resources out there. There's always stuff that you can use without having to make on your own. Now, these papers that I've got out in front of me are from my own personal campaign. Some of them do use source material, some of them are completely from my own imagination or things that my players have helped come up with. This top one, for example, is the world that we're in, but I do have some that come from other source books. If you are a fan of Magic the Gathering, you might recognize the Plain of Ravnica. That is a city that shows up in our campaign world. So whether you're making things completely from scratch, whether you are using everything from a source book, or any mix of things in between, I just wanted to go over a couple of hints, some ideas that I personally have found helpful and that might help you in creating your own campaign. And to start with, let me see if I can find, that'll work, a mix of cities and countries. So when you're making a D&D world, you tend to want to think about where the campaign is taking place, what might be relevant in the place that you are in, and what that specific place looks like. So, for example, this one on the left here is an island. It's its own nation in my personal world. And the one on the right, here, let's actually turn it, is a city. So you do not have to be this detailed. This is just something that I personally find entertaining and interesting. But even the basics of knowing if they're in this country, are they in a forested area? Are they in a mountain area? Is it a desert? Those are the kinds of things you're going to want to think of, because that's going to help influence the different encounters that they have, the different people they run into. And also, speaking of people, who lives in this world, right? This is Dungeons and Dragons. It can be things like humans, right? The everyday normal people that we encounter on a daily basis. And it could be as fantastical as things like dragons and dragonborn and orcs and elves, right? So you want to think about who might be living in this place. And one thing that I have found to be very helpful is when you're thinking of the people who live here, breaking it down into a percentages. So things like maybe 50% of the people here are human, 25% are elves, and 25% are dwarves. So you don't have to know the exact number of people that are walking around or the exact names of people that are walking around, but it gives you an idea that if your party walks into a random city, the kind of people they might run into. And then, along with the kinds of people, it might also help to think about what is going on in that city or in that region. So if we shift over to the city map I've got here, I have all the different paths laid out, all the different houses and buildings and everything like that. And you do not have to go that far. That is just something, again, that I personally enjoy doing. But what is helpful is if we flip it over, I have a list of things that might be relevant to the players. So we have all the different names of the districts in the city, what they are good at, whether they're traders, whether they are part of guilds, or they're like the slums, the kind of darker, like seedier places that people might hang out in if they're part of a thieves guild. I have general lists of shops, things where people can go to buy things. So if the players decide, hey, I want to go to this random shop, you have some prepared. Same thing with other relevant groups and some inns. Now, that doesn't, if you look at this, include every single building on this map, right? I have honestly, no idea what the majority of these buildings are, because there's not much of a need for me to know that kind of stuff. You, as a DM, do not need to know every single little detail that's going on in the city. Because if you knew every single little thing, that's a lot to handle. So if you are taking care of the basics, and if you're understanding the people who live here, if you're understanding the general idea of what's happening in the city, then you should be okay. One of the last things I do want to mention, though, is when you're looking at cities, when you're looking at countries, if you know what the government of the country looks like, or how the people in that country or the people in that city operate, it'll help you when you're building things out. So I'm going to use, again, each of these as examples. The one on the left here is a country that I created called Jorn. It is a group of 4 different tribes of people that all work together for the common good. So we have where each of the tribes are located, we have their common area, and that gives me an idea that if the players were to go to this island, what they might encounter, what some of the laws in place might be, what some of the culture is in this place, because each of the 4 tribes would have their own individual culture. Now, what that culture is, who knows, right? Maybe I don't even know it yet as the DM, because I haven't put that much thought into it yet. But this gives me the basic framework of what I would need to get going with creating a city, a country, or anything like that. On the other hand, going to this city, this is a city in a completely different part of the world from where this country is. And this is actually a monarchy over here. So there's a king and a queen, and that is the entire government system. So I really don't need to put too much work into thinking about what is going on in the city, right? It's run by the king and the queen. If it's not run directly by them, they probably have people that they put in charge of things. But if the party who goes into the city, if they were to wind up getting in trouble or not knowing exactly what to do or who to talk to, there's an easy answer, and it's the king and the queen. Now, I'm not going to go too in-depth into all of these maps right now. I think that's a future video. But as you can see, I'm not a great artist. A lot of this probably doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Going through it, it's just a bunch of lines and squiggles and nothing in particular too fancy. But I like to show these, especially to my students when I'm first teaching them about Dungeons & Dragons, because you don't have to be a fantastic artist to be a DM. You don't have to have all this secret knowledge that the players don't have, and I think that's a very common misconception here. The idea that you need to know what's happening at all times in all parts of the world isn't necessarily true. If you have a basic understanding of the countries, of the cities, of the people in charge, then you shouldn't have too much of a problem with what's going on. So, like I said, I will take a closer look at this in the future in case people need a little bit of extra, motivation or things to take away from this. We will look at my own personal homebrew world later. But the last thing I do want to say is don't worry about, like I said, knowing everything or knowing what's going on, especially if you are using a source book or if you're even using just your own notes, right? I don't anticipate anyone's ever going to get upset with you if you have to say that you have to check your notes or you have to check the book that all this stuff is coming from, because nobody can be expected to know everything. Even though I know a lot of times the players expect the DM does know everything, we don't all of the time. So it's important to know that whether you like making maps, whether you like planning things out and creating campaigns, or you just like using the source books, because that has probably a much more in-depth story for you and it's much easier. Maybe you don't have enough time to do your own thing. That is all perfectly fine. Whatever you choose to do as a DM or a dungeon master is completely up to you, and as long as you and the players are having fun, honestly, that's all that matters. So, I think I'm going to wrap things up there, but like I said, in the future we'll take a look at this. I'll put some resources in the notes on this video in case you are looking for more tips and tricks or just some source books to look into. But with all that being said, I hope this was of some help to you, and if you have any questions or I didn't cover everything, please let me know. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.